About a week ago, I had the weirdest experience at our local playground. I was there with my two young children while they played on the slides and swings. Suddenly got a weird feeling about two men that were there walking around in circles around a building near the play equipment, an old guy and a young guy. I just felt strange and suddenly thought to myself, I have to leave now. As I was leaving, they both started walking in separate directions. The old guy walked back toward the park behind me, and the young guy walked to his car, which meant one was to my left and the other was behind me. As I'm getting the kids into the car as fast as I can, the old guy comes back from the park and goes over to the young guy's car. Instead of getting in, he stands at the boot of the vehicle, looking around while young guy is in the driver's seat. I sat in my car with the kids, doors locked, because I didn't want them to see which way I turned out of the car park. Old guy moved from back of the car to say something to the young guy through the passenger side window. Then he got in and they drove off together. Young guy looked towards my car as they left. Probably nothing, but I just had a weird feeling, and since I was alone at the park with my kids, I'm glad I listened to my gut. I was around 11 years old in this story. For context, my friends and I, Eve, Gail, and Liam, all loved playing in the sagebrush fields by my neighborhood and exploring the cliffs that looked over the valley. I was always the ringleader of the group, bringing them along to chase rabbits and catch snakes, or build forts below the cliffs. Just dumb kid stuff. One day, Eve told me that a friend of hers found two caves in the sagebrush and gave her directions to find them herself. I thought this would be perfect for a group adventure, so I rounded up my friends to search for these caves. The first one was at the bottom of a smallish cliff, so we climbed down one by one. It was clearly a hangout spot for teenagers or something, since the ground was littered with empty beer cans and liquor bottles. The rocky walls were covered in graffiti, and there was an old tattered blanket in the furthest corner. However, there was nothing of interest to a bunch of sixth graders, so we moved on. The second cave was way smaller. Not even one person could fit inside. I guess if you really wanted to, you could cram yourself in and sit down, but it would be extremely claustrophobic. All four of us huddled around the mouth of the cave, peering inside. Of course, I was the closest and could see more than the others. I noticed a wide tunnel that led deep into the rocks. In the very back of that tunnel, I caught movement. I looked closer, squinting my eyes to adjust to the darkness and trying to figure out if I was actually seeing something. There was a medium-sized animal, if you could even call it that, facing away from us, crouched over and breathing heavily. It was nearly bald with a few clumps of hair on its back, and it was so thin I could see the outline of its spine and ribs. "Gale, look!" I pointed down the tunnel and moved away so he could see. He hesitated before speaking. "What is that?" I was relieved that he saw it too, but the feeling of unease became stronger the more time we spent near the cave. "How would I know?" I responded. I moved closer to look at it again. Liam and Eve both stood a safe distance, nervous and preparing to escape if something went horribly wrong. I think they also felt the lingering sense of danger, but were smart enough to stay away. My 11-year-old brain thought the best course of action was to pick up a rock and hit the thing to get it to move. And thinking back on it, that was the worst possible thing I could have done. My friends watched as I grabbed the rock off the ground and chucked it hard, hitting the thing right in the back. As soon as that rock struck it, the thing swung its head around and stared at me with these horrific, blank eyes that nearly ripped through my soul and made me shit my pants just about. Adrenaline and utter terror surged through my body, and I did not stick around to see if that thing was coming after me. I nearly fell down the side of the cliff trying to climb to safety. My friends were equally as terrified as me, repeatedly asking me what I saw and what happened. Neither me or Gail had a solid answer to what that thing was, just a description of those dreadful eyes and its bare skin in that dark corner. I recently asked Gail if he remembers seeing the creature, since he watched the rock hit it, but he denied it all. Maybe it was some seriously messed up groundhog, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. but it is still so vivid in my memory. If anyone knows or has any idea of what I saw, please let me know. I grew up in a very rural area surrounded by woods in every direction, with very few people around. It was a very unique childhood, to say the least, and I was frequently exposed to wild animals that would terrify most people, like bears, snakes, coyotes, and cougars. However, some of my scariest experiences were caused by people. These two stories in particular traumatized me as a child. One day, when I was about 9 years old, my younger brother and I were taking care of our livestock when a rooster became increasingly aggressive with my brother. It attacked him relentlessly, and my mother had to shoot it. It was an incredibly scary and emotional experience for us, and we needed to go inside the house to calm down. My brother had scratches and peck marks all over his body, and after cleaning him up, we just started watching TV. A good amount of time passed, and over the sounds of the TV, we heard loud stomping and a strange man's voice shouting. We were petrified, slowly crept up the steps to try and see who it was without being seen ourselves. When we got closer, we heard the man calling for us by name, which terrified us even more. When the man came into view, he was the tallest, most intimidating man I had seen in my life up until that point, and he was wearing heavy body armor. Turns out he was a police officer, and he escorted us out of the house. The short walk out of my house felt like years, with neither of my parents in sight, being entirely unaware of what was happening. When we walked out of the front door, my heart sank when I saw my mother in handcuffs with another officer. I don't remember how long it lasted, or exactly what they said, but sitting on that porch with my mother and brother was surreal. Eventually, after seeing the dead rooster and putting the pieces together, my mom was released, and then I witnessed seemingly the entire local SWAT team exit the woods surrounding my house. Turns out my closest neighbors made a false police call. It could have gone a lot worse. It was still one of the scariest days of my childhood. A few years later, my brother and I were home alone. I would have been around 12 at the time. I don't remember what we were doing, but we were interrupted by our dogs barking very aggressively and loud banging on our front door. We just hoped the person knocking would leave, but they continued knocking and eventually started yelling out. Turns out one of our dogs was attacking the man at the door. We peeked out one window to see the stereotypical kidnapping van with a dark paint coat, tinted windows, and even a large trailer attached to the back of it. All I could think about was the terrifying possibilities that every kid is warned about and didn't know how to protect my brother and self. The man with the van aggressively banged on our door, literally shaking the walls, all the while being bitten, scratched, and barked at by our dogs for over 30 minutes straight. During this, we called our parents and another farther away neighbor to come help us. Eventually when they arrived, they settled the situation out, and our neighbors, same ones from the false police call, had sent their friends to our house instead of theirs. It still never explained the vehicle, trailer, and banging, or why on earth this man would put up with being attacked by our dog for so long, but eventually everything turned out okay. Instances like these made rural life so much scarier for me until I grew up and moved out. Usually on nice days, I'm at the park, and during my time there, I smoke. After parking under the tree next to a blue SUV, I start getting high. I look over to my left, and there's an old guy leaning into my car window, asking me questions. I'm nervous as fuck, so I pick up my phone and scroll Facebook. He then proceeded to ask me my name. I said Lily. He then asked where I lived. I pointed in some random ass direction. He then tells me how he wants to cook and lives in his blue $50,000 SUV. To be honest, I didn't care. So I'm still looking at my phone, and I put out the blunt. He's now saying he's 50. He was at least 70, and loved how beautiful my skin was. Now I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm high, so I'm nervous and irritated, but also didn't want to be rude. I said thank you. He then said if I wanted to smoke with him, I could, since he's always at the park. I told him that I had a girlfriend and that I'm not interested. He says, well, guess I'm holding you up, and I replied with a yes and then laughed. I start putting on my seatbelt and turn my car on. Still leaning in my window, he says, I love you. And I said, okay. He starts walking back to his car, laughing as I'm rolling my shits up. He leaves before me, and I follow him to the intersection. Now I'm paranoid and just driving around because I didn't want to potentially lead into my house. When I felt comfortable and knew he wasn't around, I booked at the F home and haven't left since. I know I could have left sooner, but this was my first ever encounter like that at this park. I live in a city in the Midwest and was hanging out at a friend's house one night. As I was leaving, it was dark, probably 10, 11 o'clock at night. I'm a small woman, and I look a lot younger than I am, so I've experienced quite a few creepy encounters. Sadly, this one still makes me nervous. I walk to my vehicle, which is parked right at the end of the sidewalk, and get in. I live about 4 minutes away, and I'm kind of on autopilot. I never notice anything until this SUV behind me seems like they're making all the same turns. Sometimes I get paranoid that people are following me and continue to drive home. I assume they'll turn any minute, as they often do, except when I pull in my driveway, they pull across the end. They block me in. I'm terrified at this point, so I call my husband as he's inside, and I stay in the car. He walks to the door and they pull away. This happened about a year ago, and I still have yet to return to the store without my husband. So last July, I took my then 4 and 6-year-old sons to Target for back-to-school shopping. Since having kids and hearing all those horror stories, I'm very observant of my surroundings when out. Anyways, while at Target, like most women, I looked through all the sections. While in the women's clothing, I noticed 2 older men close by that kept looking over our way. I thought maybe I'm just being paranoid, so I kept going about my business, but keeping my boys super close. We go to the baby section, they pop up, toys, makeup, and same thing. I was really feeling uneasy because they seemed to be everywhere we were, and they never had a cart. One guy was holding one little thing. I go check out and wait for a big group of nurses leaving Starbucks to walk out with. I threw the boys in the car without buckling them and locked the doors. As soon as I look up, the 2 guys walk out empty-handed, looking around. I didn't think they saw me, so I started to leave when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw them behind me in a truck. I stopped right there and turned and took a photo so they could see me. They turned like they were going back to the store, and I park over a couple of stores down and call the cops. While I'm on the phone with them in a full-blown panic attack, I watch one of the guys change his shirt and go back inside. I waited until the police got there so I could make sure they got and had the right guys. I don't know what their plan was that day, but my mama gut told me it wasn't anything good. I'm so thankful my babies and I are okay. A few years ago, I worked in a busy but dangerous area of Rio de Janeiro. There are just too many streets where local criminals can ambush pedestrians, mug them, and effectively run into hiding. One day I worked until 7 p.m. and my fiance picked me up. The streets were already deserted, so we decided to find a safe spot and call an Uber. We quickly found 2 men watching the entrance of a store. One of them was a doorman in uniform, while the other one was wearing regular clothes and speaking into a walkie-talkie. So far, just regular Rio stuff. The second guy and I had some small talk about how dangerous the area was, after which we all went silent. The Uber was taking some time, so he eventually asked if I was sure it was coming. I checked and confirmed it. He decided to explain his curiosity. Well, today will be an especially dangerous day. We want to do something about these lowlives. As a cop, I find it distasteful. I immediately hide the shiver that came down my spine. Vigilante death squads are a big deal in Brazil, and a word to the wise is enough. I took a deep breath and played dumb to be sure. "Are you a civilian or a military cop?" He smirked and answered, "Today I'm neither." More or less after a very long minute, the driver arrived. We said goodbye and left. On the following day, I saw almost no homeless people in the area. I knew why they didn't want to be seen there. Nothing ever appeared on the news. My mother worked long shifts at the airport 7 days a week, so me and my younger sister were at home by ourselves majority of the time. For reference, we lived in a house that had gates on the windows and a gated door that we had to lock to get to the actual front door. It was late at night, about 10 p.m., and me and my sister were watching TV and preparing for bed. I noticed some sounds coming from our front door and realized that it was someone banging on the gate. I was naive back then and decided to open the door to see who it was. It was a young man in his late 20s. He had a black and white striped shirt with a jean jacket. I asked him what he needed, and he sat there with a blank face and said calmly that he needed me to let him in. I asked him why, and he repeated himself and said, "Let me in, I'm in trouble." He kept looking back over his shoulder, and I felt a bit unnerved and decided not to unlock the gate for him. As soon as I made the decision not to let him in, the police showed up and pulled their guns. They gave him directions to walk backwards with his hands up, and at the moment, I decided now was the time to close the door. I quickly realized that he may have been running from the police for a crime that he committed. To this day, I still wonder if I would have opened the door and let him in, what would have happened. My boyfriend was driving me home last night around midnight. I was on my phone pulling up something to show him when he parked. When he whipped around and asked me if I saw that at his window, I said no and asked what. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We have some deer and other small wildlife. The most dramatic human activity was several years back when a car was speeding and crashed through the living room of the house at the bottom of the hill. He said there was a girl on all fours in a driveway, waving her hand and phone light at us as we drove by. We slowed down to discuss if we should go back. Is she hurt or in trouble? Trying to flag help for someone inside? Or filming a TikTok? I was worried this was some ploy to make us stop so someone else could jump out. We both thought it was weird and decided to go back in case she needed help. Our windows had been down to get some fresh night air, so we rolled them up when we went back. When we went back, she was no longer on the ground and ran up to my window very quickly. She looked like she was in PJs and was in her teens. My boyfriend went nope, swerved around her, and drove out the neighborhood as another car was driving in and passed by her. We were both pretty rattled at this point because it was so unusual and decided that we'd do another loop back. This was the only way into the neighborhood, so we didn't really have a choice. If she was still there after that other car had driven by, he would talk to her since she'd be on his side again. We drove back, and she was just standing in the middle of the driveway, waving her arms with her phone light again. He slowed down with his window down and asked her if everything was all right. She said yes and started running at the car again, almost in front of another vehicle driving by. We were a bit at a loss and very uneasy about the whole thing, but figured there was nothing else we should do at this point. She said she was fine and had a phone to call 911 if something was going on. He dropped me off and said she wasn't there when he drove back out. I have no idea what that was all about, but I find it very unnerving. Several years ago, my family went on a long weekend trip to Gettysburg, and obviously, we had some spots we wanted to check out that people say are good for ghost activity. Late one night, we decided to check out the covered bridge that everyone talks about on the advice of a family friend who had an experience there. Turned out, half the other tourists also had the same idea, so we ended up leaving before we got out of the car because it was packed. On the way back, we drove on the roads that go across the battlefields to get back to the downtown area, and quite suddenly, the radio volume not only turned up on its own, but we heard nothing but static. The sound of a man screaming and a rhythmic pops that, to me, sounded like the recording of a cannon or gunfire or something similar. As we drove away, the volume went back down, and when my dad went to turn the dial back up, it was back to the regular radio station we had. Keep in mind it is pitch black out at night. No streetlights, no other cars, too far from town for that light to do much. The next morning, we drove back over there, and in daytime, we saw that where the incident happened was a building that had a sign outside that marked it as a Civil War hospital. I know from my countless hours of watching the paranormal reality TV shows that most professionals in that space would categorize this as a residual haunting. I'm not sure my stance on the idea of ghosts and hauntings, but this is something I still can't explain, and is still with me.